There was a time when every piece of land in North America had its own flavor, and Native American tribes knew them all. They didn't just eat what grew around them. They studied it, preserved it, and turned wild plants into food, medicine, and trade goods. But then, one by one, those native fruits began to disappear. Not because nature failed, but because people decided to erase them. Some were banned by law, others labeled as weeds, and a few were simply forgotten. The story starts with a small, dark berry that once filled entire baskets, the black currant. For centuries, indigenous families harvested these berries every summer, drying them for winter or mixing them into nutrient-rich cakes. When settlers arrived, they adopted the same habit. Black currants were everywhere, in jams, teas, and syrups. They had more vitamin C than oranges and could keep a family healthy through the coldest months. Then, in 1911, the federal government declared war on them. The reason? Black currants carried a fungal disease that could harm white pine trees, a major source of lumber. To protect the timber industry, the government banned the berry completely. Families were ordered to destroy their bushes. Native and immigrant communities that had relied on them for generations saw their food source wiped out in a single season. Ironically, the ban worked too well. Within a few decades, most Americans had no idea what a black currant even was. Meanwhile, in Europe, people kept eating them, in candies, medicines, and desserts. America had erased its own fruit heritage to protect trees that could have been managed in other ways. The ban was finally lifted in most states long ago, but the knowledge didn't return. Walk into a grocery store today and you'll see blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, but almost never black currants. One of the most nutritious berries on earth still grows wild across the country, untouched and unrecognized. And that wasn't the last time a useful plant became an outlaw. The next victim was the humble mulberry, one of the most adaptable fruit trees in North America. Native Americans had long used mulberries for food, dye, and medicine. They could grow in nearly any climate, surviving floods, droughts, and poor soil. For centuries, families collected their berries, drying or fermenting them for later use. Then, in the 1950s, cities began banning mulberry trees, not for safety or disease, but for being too messy. The berries, they said, stained sidewalks and cars. Some towns fined homeowners for growing them. Others ordered removal of the trees entirely. That's right. A tree that produced free, healthy food was banned because the fruit could make a purple stain. Native tribes never stopped appreciating the mulberry. They saw what city planners didn't: a tree that fed both people and animals, that shaded homes and restored soil. But modern America preferred clean concrete over natural abundance. Within a generation, children who might have grown up climbing those trees had no idea they existed. Here's the strange twist. Those same mulberries are now being quietly reintroduced by gardeners and homesteaders who realized how valuable they are. The trees grow fast, need little care, and produce more fruit than most modern crops. What was once called a nuisance is now being rediscovered as a symbol of self-reliance and resilience, values Native Americans had understood for thousands of years. If you're enjoying uncovering these forgotten stories, take a moment to hit the like button. It tells the platform you value history, not the kind in textbooks but the kind that grows from the earth itself. The next forgotten fruit tells an even stranger story, one that starts with fear, not messiness. The chokecherry was one of the most important plants in the Great Plains. Native peoples used it in countless ways. They cooked the fruit into thick syrup, dried it into cakes, and mixed it with meat and fat to make pemmican, the original survival food. Chokecherries were medicine, food, and trade all in one. But in the mid-20th century, officials began warning that chokecherries were dangerous because of the pits inside. The seeds do contain small amounts of cyanogenic compounds, but only if eaten raw in large quantities. Native tribes had always known how to use them safely. Cook the berries and the toxins disappear. They had done it for generations. Panic, however, spread faster than understanding. Local governments banned the trees from parks, developers cleared wild groves, and before long, one of North America's oldest food sources was gone from public memory. And yet, science has come full circle. Modern studies show that chokecherries are packed with antioxidants, more than many so-called superfoods. What Native Americans had once known through observation and experience is now proven in laboratories. It's a pattern you'll see again and again in this story: indigenous knowledge dismissed as superstition, only to be rediscovered decades later as advanced science. And that brings us to another fruit that was never dangerous, never messy, just unlucky: the huckleberry. This small, deep blue berry was a staple of native diets in the Pacific Northwest. Tribes traveled long distances to harvest it, drying the fruit for winter or trading it across regions. But in the 1920s, commercial agriculture decided that huckleberries were too wild. They varied in size and shape, not uniform enough for grocery stores. So farmers replaced them with cultivated blueberries, which looked prettier in baskets but had less flavor and fewer nutrients. Entire huckleberry fields were bulldozed for blueberry farms. Once again, nature's diversity was replaced by convenience. It's easy to see a pattern here. The fruits Native Americans relied on for centuries were erased, not because they failed but because they didn't fit into modern industry. Yet many still grow wild, in forests, along rivers, beside old trails. They're part of the landscape waiting to be remembered. For thousands of years, Native Americans managed entire ecosystems as if they were vast living gardens. Every tree, shrub, and vine had a purpose. They didn't just survive on what the land offered. They shaped it, selected it, and protected it. Some of the most vital foods on this continent owe their existence to that care. Yet one of the greatest examples of this partnership between people and nature vanished almost overnight: the American chestnut. The American chestnut once ruled the forests of the East. It wasn't just another tree, it was a keystone of life. Every autumn, its nuts blanketed the ground like a second harvest. Families collected them in woven baskets, roasted them by fires, or ground them into flour that could last all winter. The nuts were naturally sweet and full of nutrients, a perfect survival food. Deer, bears, and turkeys depended on them too. When native communities followed the chestnut cycle, they weren't just gathering food, they were maintaining a balance that fed the entire forest. Then, in 1904, everything changed. A fungal blight arrived on imported trees from Asia. Within a few decades, it destroyed nearly every American chestnut in the wild, an estimated 4 billion trees. Imagine walking through a mountain valley that once glowed gold in autumn, now silent, the canopy gone. For native families, it was more than the loss of food. It was the disappearance of a teacher. The chestnut had guided their seasonal movements, their trade, even their ceremonies. When the trees died, a thread of connection between people and land snapped forever. But the chestnut wasn't the only loss. The same decades that saw forests fall also saw the destruction of another native treasure, the barberry bush. To the untrained eye, it was a tangle of thorns and bright red berries. To Native Americans, it was medicine, food, and preservative all in one. The berries were rich in vitamin C and used to make tart tonics that cured scurvy, eased fevers, and added flavor to winter stews. The bark and roots became herbal remedies for infections and digestive troubles. Barberries were part of daily survival, not decoration. When industrial wheat farming expanded in the early 1900s, agricultural scientists blamed barberry for spreading a fungus known as wheat rust. To protect the grain industry, the government launched eradication campaigns. Agents went door to door ordering people to cut down their bushes. Farmers who refused faced fines. Within years, barberry vanished from countless homesteads. What no one seemed to consider was that Native Americans had coexisted with barberries for generations without ever destroying their crops. They understood that the secret lay in balance, not elimination. But balance was a lesson the modern world was too impatient to learn. The same story repeated with the only naturally caffeinated plant native to North America, Yupon holly. For centuries, tribes from Texas to Florida brewed its leaves into a tea known as ACI or black drink. It was used in purification ceremonies, community gatherings, and diplomacy between tribes. The caffeine gave energy, while the tea's antioxidants improved health. It wasn't just a beverage, it was a ritual that symbolized connection, focus, and respect. When European settlers arrived, they noticed how popular this native tea was, and how unnecessary it made imported tea from across the Atlantic. British traders didn't like that idea. Soon, colonial authorities began labeling the drink as primitive and unhealthy. To make things worse, scientists gave Yupon holly an unfortunate Latin name, Ilex vomitoria. One misleading word was enough to destroy its reputation. For centuries afterward, Americans ignored one of the most sustainable, healthful plants growing freely across the southern forests. Native communities, however, never stopped using it. They knew how to brew it properly, roasting the leaves for flavor, mixing them with herbs, and sharing the drink as part of ceremony and hospitality. Yupon holly wasn't just caffeine. It was community in a cup. Modern research now confirms what indigenous knowledge had proven long ago. Yupon is high in antioxidants, gentle on the body, and capable of growing year-round with almost no resources. It could have become America's own native coffee, but instead, it was nearly erased from memory. If you're the kind of person who enjoys uncovering knowledge that history tried to bury, take a second to like this video. It tells the platform that stories like these deserve to live again. As the forest changed and agriculture took over, Native Americans continued to adapt. When one resource vanished, they shifted to another. The strength of their survival systems wasn't in a single crop, but in diversity. They understood that no single food could stand against time, weather, or disease. Instead, they built networks of abundance: chestnuts in the highlands, berries in the river valleys, and tea in the southern forests. That flexibility was what allowed them to endure centuries of environmental change. The tragedy came when that philosophy of diversity met a world obsessed with uniformity. Industrial farming demanded identical crops that could be shipped, stored, and sold. Forests were cleared for fields, wild groves replaced by straight rows. The foods that had once symbolized resilience were rebranded as weeds, pests, or irrelevant. Yet beneath that erasure, the old roots remained. Even today, wild barberry still gleams red on forgotten hillsides. Yupon holly still thrives along southern roadsides. Blight-resistant chestnuts are slowly returning to Appalachian soil. Every one of these plants tells the same story: that knowledge, once ignored, never truly disappears. It waits in the ground until someone cares enough to listen again. The lesson is simple but powerful: survival doesn't come from domination. It comes from understanding. And few people understood the balance between life and land better than the Native Americans who first named these fruits, harvested their medicine, and passed their wisdom from generation to generation. If you believe this knowledge shouldn't be forgotten again, share this story or leave a comment below. The more we talk about these lost harvests, the more likely they'll return to the land and to our lives. When people speak about ancient grains, they often picture quinoa or millet, foods rediscovered and rebranded by modern culture. But long before any of that, Native American civilizations already had their own miracle crop: amaranth. The Aztecs, the Hopi, and many other tribes cultivated it as both food and symbol. The plant was extraordinary. Its tiny seeds packed more protein than wheat, its leaves could be cooked as greens, and its resilience allowed it to thrive in poor soil with little water. It wasn't just a staple, it was sacred. During ceremonies, seeds were mixed with honey and shaped into figures representing gods, then shared among the people. Eating it was a spiritual act, a reminder that nourishment came from the same earth that sustained them. Then came the Spanish. When they arrived in Mexico in the 1500s, they were shocked to find entire festivals centered around amaranth. To them, these rituals looked like idolatry. The Spanish rulers banned the crop outright, burning fields and punishing those caught planting it. Growing amaranth became a crime, even though it was one of the most efficient and nutritious crops on the continent. The result was catastrophic. In less than a generation, knowledge that had been refined over centuries nearly vanished. People who once measured their lives by its harvest were forced to abandon it or risk death. What makes this story even more tragic is the irony of what came next. When American farmers later expanded westward, they began calling wild amaranth a noxious weed. They spent decades trying to eradicate it from their fields, the same plant that had once sustained entire civilizations. Centuries later, modern nutritionists rediscovered it and named it a superfood. Today, health stores sell amaranth for premium prices, unaware that it's not an exotic discovery but a revival of indigenous genius. What was once sacred was first outlawed, then forgotten, then sold back to the world as a novelty. This pattern repeated across the continent, again and again. Another victim was the pawpaw, sometimes called the custard apple. Native Americans loved it for its sweet, creamy texture and tropical flavor. The fruit grew wild along rivers and forests from Florida to New York. It was the largest native fruit in North America and a dependable late summer harvest. Families ate it fresh, dried it for winter, and even used its fibrous inner bark to make rope. The pawpaw wasn't just delicious, it was essential. But the fruit had one fatal flaw: it didn't travel well. Once picked, it spoiled within days. When the food industry began prioritizing crops that could be shipped and stored, the pawpaw had no chance. Apples and peaches, both European imports, took over the markets. Cities labeled pawpaw trees messy and banned them from urban planting. By the mid-20th century, most Americans had never even heard of them. Yet Native Americans had long understood how to work with its short lifespan, gathering pawpaws at their peak and drying or pressing them for later use. They respected the rhythm of nature rather than forcing it to fit human convenience. The same respect guided their relationship with the wild plum. These trees once covered North America, from the Great Plains to the eastern woodlands. Their fruit came in every shade: crimson, gold, purple, each variety suited to its region. Tribes managed entire plum groves, pruning, burning undergrowth, and replanting young shoots to keep them healthy. The plums were eaten fresh, dried, or made into rich sauces used in ceremonial feasts. Some tribes traveled hundreds of miles each summer to harvest them. Then came the era of progress. As agriculture spread, wild plums were labeled invasive. Towns passed ordinances ordering their removal. The justification was that they attracted pests and wasted farmland. What those officials didn't understand was that these groves also nourished pollinators, stabilized soil, and fed wildlife. Removing them didn't just eliminate a food source, it unbalanced entire ecosystems. Commercial growers replaced diverse wild plums with a handful of standardized species that could ship better. The taste, nutrition, and genetic variety of the original fruit were lost. Today, scientists studying climate resilience have found that some of those forgotten wild plums were naturally drought-tolerant and pest-resistant, traits modern agriculture now desperately needs. Native Americans had preserved this diversity instinctively, understanding that strength comes from variation. But industry valued uniformity more than adaptability, and so the strongest fruits were the first to go. Further north, another treasure faded into obscurity, the persimmon. Its orange, honey-sweet flesh was once a staple for tribes across the Midwest and Southeast. Native families knew to wait until the fruit softened and dropped naturally before eating it. Unripe persimmons were so astringent they could dry your mouth instantly, nature's warning label. When fully ripe, though, they turned into golden sweetness packed with vitamins and fiber. The fruit could be eaten fresh, dried, or mashed into puddings. When settlers arrived, they misunderstood the fruit entirely. They bit into green persimmons, recoiled at the bitter taste, and declared the tree useless. Colonial authorities began discouraging persimmon planting, calling them trash trees. Over time, the fruit disappeared from markets, replaced by imported varieties that fit industrial demands. But Native Americans never stopped using it. They made persimmon bread, mixed dried pulp into pemmican, and used the wood for tools. They understood what others didn't, that patience turned bitterness into sweetness. That same patience defined Native relationships with food everywhere. They didn't force nature to work faster. They worked in harmony with its timing. Blueberries, for instance, were never planted in neat rows. They grew wild in great patches managed by controlled burns. Every few years, tribes burned sections of forest, clearing brush and encouraging new blueberry growth. The result was abundant harvests and healthy ecosystems. When European settlers outlawed burning, thinking it destructive, the wild blueberries vanished. Within decades, thick undergrowth choked out the berry fields. The irony is hard to miss. The very practice that sustained the land for centuries was banned, and now scientists are rediscovering prescribed burning as a key tool for forest health. The indigenous methods that once fed people and protected biodiversity are finally being studied as advanced ecological science. Among these rediscoveries, one fruit stands out for how thoroughly it was misunderstood: the ground cherry. Wrapped in a delicate paper husk, it looks like a tiny lantern. Native Americans cherished it for its sweet tart flavor and long storage life. They used it in stews, dried it for winter, and turned it into sauces. But when settlers noticed that ground cherries belonged to the nightshade family, which includes both tomatoes and toxic plants, they panicked. Officials declared them dangerous, labeling them weeds and ordering their removal. In truth, the only risk came from eating them unripe, something native harvesters already knew to avoid. For centuries, ground cherries disappeared from gardens, dismissed as poisonous. Yet the plant survived quietly in fields and forests. Today, chefs and botanists are reintroducing it, praising its taste and resilience. Another lost crop, another circle closing. All these stories share the same thread. They're not just about plants, they're about perspective. Native Americans built food systems on observation, balance, and respect. Every berry, fruit, and seed had its place in the web of life. When that balance was broken, by fear, by greed, or by misunderstanding, we didn't just lose flavors. We lost knowledge. If you're still here listening, you're part of the small group helping to bring this wisdom back. A simple like or comment helps keep these forgotten stories alive, not just online but in memory, because the land still remembers even when people forget. When settlers began covering the continent with towns, fences, and straight lines, they saw nature as something to control. For Native Americans, control was never the goal. Harmony was. To them, every plant was a partner. Every harvest came with responsibility. The land fed you only if you fed it back. That simple rule built a system far more sustainable than anything the industrial age has ever produced. And the proof is still here, in the forgotten plants that refused to die, in the seeds that kept growing even after people stopped naming them. Take the elderberry. It grew wild across riverbanks and woodlands, its dark clusters ripening just as the first chills of autumn arrived. Native Americans knew this plant well. They boiled the berries into syrups, teas, and soups that strengthened the body through long winters. They used its flowers for medicine, its hollow stems for instruments and tools. Nothing was wasted. The rule was always the same: respect the plant, prepare it properly, and it would give you life. Raw berries were never eaten because they carried compounds that could make you sick. Cooking neutralized them completely, transforming the fruit into a potent remedy against fever, infection, and exhaustion. When European settlers lost that knowledge, fear replaced wisdom. A few children ate raw berries, fell ill, and suddenly the plant was branded as poison. Towns banned elderberry bushes, gardeners uprooted them, and another thread of ancient understanding was cut. The irony is that modern science now confirms what indigenous healers already knew. Cooked elderberries are rich in antioxidants and antiviral compounds that help fight respiratory illness. Health stores now sell bottles of elderberry syrup for prices that would have made tribal traders laugh. What was once medicine from the forest became medicine from a factory, proof that progress often just circles back to forgotten truths. The same cycle of misunderstanding surrounded another fruit, the serviceberry, known to different tribes as Juneberry or Saskatoon. Its name came from timing. The berries ripened when spring funerals were held and church services began. But long before that, Native Americans gathered them as one of the first sweet foods of the year. They were mixed into pemmican, baked into cakes, or eaten fresh by the handful. The fruit was more than food, it marked the rhythm of the seasons. When the serviceberries turned purple, salmon would run upstream, and the great migrations began. It was nature's calendar written in color and taste. City planners in the mid-1900s saw none of that. They saw only messy trees that dropped berries on sidewalks. Ordinances required property owners to remove them. Landscapers bred ornamental versions, trees that bloomed but bore no fruit. Within decades, most Americans forgot that the serviceberry was edible at all. The knowledge that once united communities with the land was replaced by a preference for neat lawns and spotless pavement. Yet, in many suburbs, the old trees still stand, flowering each spring, their berries ignored by everyone but the birds. Hidden in plain sight, they're living witnesses to what happens when convenience outruns wisdom. What connects elderberries, serviceberries, pawpaws, chestnuts, and all the rest isn't nostalgia, it's survival strategy. Native Americans built entire cultural systems around cooperation with the environment. Their food network wasn't linear like ours, with farms feeding cities. It was circular. Waste became soil, soil became food, food became life, and gratitude closed the loop. Each generation inherited not just recipes but responsibilities: when to harvest, how much to take, and when to give back. Those unwritten rules prevented the land from collapsing under human need. Compare that with the later model of consumption. When forests were cleared and single-crop farming took over, everything depended on control: pesticides, fences, irrigation, ownership. Productivity rose for a while, but diversity vanished. The earth stopped breathing freely. The wild pantry that had once fed entire nations turned into a patchwork of fields that could fail with a single drought. The irony is that the very people once called primitive had already mastered the science of sustainability centuries earlier. Listen to how they organized a year: chestnuts in the fall, persimmons in late autumn, serviceberries in early summer, wild blueberries mid-season, and preserved pemmican for the lean months. Food wasn't random, it was rhythm. The calendar was written not on paper but in the bloom of flowers, the return of birds, the taste of the wind. That timing was more accurate than any clock. It kept people healthy without storage warehouses, without refrigeration, without waste. They called it living with the land, something modern society is only beginning to understand again. When archaeologists study old campsites, they still find traces of these cycles: pits filled with preserved seeds, stones blackened by smoke, fragments of woven baskets once used to carry berries. Each layer tells the same story: survival built on observation. They didn't conquer nature, they collaborated with it. Even their fires were purposeful. The controlled burns that modern forestry now praises were ancient indigenous practice. Those small, deliberate fires renewed the soil, kept pests away, and helped certain plants, like wild blueberries and plums, return stronger the next year. Every spark carried intention. It's tempting to look back at all of this as history, as if those ways belong to the past. But the truth is, they never stopped being relevant. Climate change, soil exhaustion, and food insecurity are the same challenges faced centuries ago, only magnified. The answers still lie in the same principles: diversity, respect, balance. The genius of indigenous food systems wasn't magic, it was attention. They studied the world until they understood its logic, then lived by it. Modern scientists are finally catching up. Botanists now reintroduce wild plums for their resilience. Ecologists use traditional fire patterns to restore grasslands. Nutritionists study pawpaw and amaranth as sustainable alternatives to imported crops. Even Yupon holly is making a quiet comeback, marketed as America's forgotten tea. Piece by piece, the circle is closing, not because of nostalgia but because the old ways work. Every generation faces a choice: repeat mistakes or relearn what our ancestors already knew. The land doesn't forget, it waits. Those elderberry bushes still grow along forgotten fences. The serviceberry still blooms beside highways. Pawpaw trees still hide in river valleys, offering fruit to anyone who bothers to look. And each time someone rediscovers them, a small part of that ancient conversation between people and earth begins again. If this story moved you, let it move you to curiosity. Look for these plants in your own region. Learn their names. Taste what once fed nations. Because remembering isn't just an act of history, it's an act of repair. The wind still carries the scent of smoke from those old cooking fires. The rivers still feed the same soil. The seeds still know what to do. We only need to listen again.